Trump's worst nightmare. Jasmine Crockett gets anonymous whistleblower with explosive evidence. Trump had never been cornered like this before. The secret audio recordings in Jasmine Crockett's hands contained his darkest secrets. And this time, there was nowhere to run, because his own voice was betraying him. The manila envelope arrived on a Tuesday morning in March 2025, slipped under the door of Representative Jasmine Crockett's congressional office sometime between midnight and dawn. The Capitol building's security cameras had mysteriously malfunctioned during that exact window, a detail that would later prove significant. No return address, no postmark, just her name written in careful block letters across the front. Inside, a single USB drive and a handwritten note. The truth America needs to hear. Play this alone. Trust no one else. Jasmine stared at the drive for a long moment, turning it over in her hands. In her 3 years in Congress, she'd received plenty of anonymous tips, conspiracy theories, and wild accusations from constituents convinced they'd uncovered the next Watergate. Most ended up in the shredder after a quick review. But something about this felt different. The weight of it, the deliberate simplicity, the precision of the timing. Someone had risked everything to get this to her specifically. Her chief of staff, Marcus Williams, knocked and entered without waiting for permission, a habit that normally annoyed her, but today felt reassuring. He carried 2 cups of coffee and the morning briefing folder, his usual Tuesday routine. "Congresswoman, we need to discuss the infrastructure markup this afternoon, and the banking committee wants to schedule your testimony about—" He stopped mid-sentence, noticing the manila envelope and USB drive on her desk. "What's that?" "I'm not sure yet," Jasmine said, closing her laptop and sliding the drive into the port with trembling fingers. "But I have a feeling we're about to find out." The first file that appeared was a simple text document titled readfirst.txt. Repeat art. Crockett. "What you're about to hear will shock you. These recordings were made at Mar-a-Lago between November 2023 and January 2025. The conversations involved Donald Trump and various associates discussing actions that may constitute federal crimes. I am a federal employee who cannot reveal my identity for obvious reasons. Each recording is time-stamped and geotagged. I have additional evidence to corroborate everything you hear. Please handle with care. The country is counting on you, a friend of democracy." Marcus read over her shoulder, his face growing pale with each line. "Jasmine, this could be anything. It could be fake. It could be a setup. It could be some kind of entrapment." "There's only one way to find out," she said, her cursor hovering over the first audio file, labeled Conversation 01. November 15th, 2024.mp3. She clicked play, and Donald Trump's unmistakable voice filled the room, crystal clear, as if he were sitting right there with them. "Look, we know the Georgia thing was rigged. We know it. They know it. Everybody knows it. But we need more than knowing. We need proof people will believe." A second voice, unfamiliar but deferential. "Sir, what kind of proof are you thinking?" "The kind that makes problems go away. Permanently. You understand what I'm saying? We can't have another 2024 situation where they just ignore the evidence and certify anyway." The recording continued for 12 agonizing minutes, Trump discussing pressure points on Georgia election officials, mentioning specific names, addresses, and family members. His tone was casual, almost cheerful, as if he were discussing dinner plans rather than potential witness intimidation. Jasmine felt her blood run cold. Marcus grabbed the back of a chair to steady himself, his coffee cup forgotten on the desk. "Jesus Christ," he whispered. "Is he talking about—" "Shh." Jasmine held up her hand, her legal training kicking in as she listened for specific language, specific threats, anything that would constitute clear evidence of criminal intent. Trump's voice continued. "Brad Raffensperger thinks he's untouchable because he stood up to us before. But Brad has a wife, kids, grandkids. People get stressed, you know? Stress causes all kinds of health problems. Heart attacks, car accidents, home invasions gone wrong. Terrible things happen when people are under too much stress. The second voice laughed nervously. Sir, are we really talking about— We're not talking about anything, Trump snapped, his tone shifting to the sharp anger his advisors knew well. We're solving problems. There's a big difference. You solve problems. You don't talk about them. The file ended with Trump giving specific instructions about surveillance and pressure applications that made Jasmine's stomach turn. She sat in stunned silence, her legal training warring with her political instincts. What she'd just heard wasn't political spin or campaign rhetoric, or even the kind of bombastic exaggeration Trump was known for. This was a sitting former president of the United States discussing potential violence against an elected official with the calm deliberation of a mob boss. Play the next one, Marcus said, his voice barely a whisper. The second recording was dated December 3rd, 2024. Trump's voice again, but this time discussing classified documents he'd hidden from federal investigators. They'll never find the real stuff. It's not at Mar-a-Lago anymore. Moved it months ago when that FBI raid happened. Eric's got a place in Montana, middle of nowhere. No neighbors for 50 miles. Nuclear stuff, CIA operations, the whole 9 yards. They want it? They can come and take it. But they'll never even think to look there. A new voice, older, more confident. Sir, keeping that material could be what? Could be smart, could be insurance. Damn right it could be. You think I'm stupid enough to hand over everything? The nuclear codes alone are worth their weight in gold to the right buyers. Putin's been asking about our submarine positions for months. Think I should just give that away for free? By the third recording, Jasmine knew she was listening to evidence of multiple federal crimes. Obstruction of justice, potential conspiracy to commit violence, mishandling of classified information, possible treason. Each file was a potential impeachment article if Trump had still been in office. As a private citizen, each represented potential decades in federal prison. But the fourth recording, dated January 18th, 2025, just 3 weeks ago, was the one that changed everything. The Crockett woman is becoming a problem, Trump's voice said, and Jasmine felt ice water flowing through her veins. She's asking too many questions in those committee hearings, getting too close to things she shouldn't know about. That housing subcommittee thing last week, she was asking about shell companies, about money flows. Someone's feeding her information. What are you suggesting, sir? I'm suggesting Representative Crockett needs to learn what happens to people who don't mind their own business. Start with her family. Her grandmother in Dallas. What's her name, Betty? Sometimes old people have falls, you know. Heart problems. Very sad when family members start dropping off. The voice continued, but Jasmine couldn't hear it over the roaring in her ears. This wasn't just evidence of corruption anymore. This was a direct, specific threat against her and her family. Her 89-year-old grandmother, who lived alone in the same house where Jasmine had grown up. Marcus was pacing now, running his hands through his hair, his face flushed with anger and fear. We have to go to the FBI right now, this minute. We call the Capitol Police. We call the Secret Service. We call everyone. No, Jasmine said quietly, her mind racing through possibilities and implications, through legal precedents and political realities. If we go to the FBI first, this disappears into an investigation that could take years. Meanwhile, Trump is out there making these kinds of plans and my grandmother's still in danger. Then what do you suggest? We can't just sit on this. Jasmine looked at her chief of staff, then at the USB drive still glowing in her laptop. We make it public. All of it. Let the American people hear what their former president really thinks about democracy and the rule of law. Jasmine, think about this carefully. If you release these recordings without proper verification, without going through official channels, they'll destroy your credibility. They'll say you fabricated them, that it's a political hit job, that you're trying to influence the 2026 elections. Then we verify them. But we do it fast and we do it right. Over the next 48 hours, Jasmine assembled a team she could trust absolutely. Dr. Amanda Chen, a forensic audio expert from Georgetown University who'd testified in dozens of federal cases. James Rodriguez, a former NSA analyst who specialized in voice authentication and had worked on the most sensitive national security cases. Sarah Martinez, an investigative journalist from The Washington Post who'd spent years covering Trump's legal troubles and had sources throughout the intelligence community. The verification process was painstaking and thorough. Every file was analyzed for signs of digital manipulation, every voice pattern cross-referenced with existing recordings from speeches, interviews, and leaked phone calls. Every background noise, every technical signature, every acoustic fingerprint was examined for authenticity and consistency. Dr. Chen worked 18-hour days, running the audio through sophisticated software that could detect even the most subtle signs of artificial manipulation. "If these are fake," she told Jasmine on Wednesday evening, "they're better than anything we've ever seen. The voice patterns match perfectly, down to Trump's specific speech impediments and breathing patterns." Rodriguez focused on the technical aspects, analyzing metadata, compression algorithms, and recording equipment signatures. "These were made with professional-grade equipment," he reported, "not something you'd buy at Best Buy. This is the kind of stuff the Secret Service uses, or high-end private security firms." Martinez worked her sources in the intelligence community, trying to verify details mentioned in the recordings. "The classified document references check out," she told Jasmine during a secure phone call. "I can't confirm the specific content, but the code names, the classification levels, the handling procedures Trump mentions, they're all accurate to things he would have had access to." The results, when they came back, were unambiguous. The recordings were genuine, unaltered, and recorded exactly when and where the anonymous source claimed. "These are real, Doctor," Chen told Jasmine on Thursday evening, her voice heavy with the implications. "Whoever made these recordings used professional equipment, and the voices match every biometric marker we have for Trump and his known associates. There's no doubt about authenticity." "What about chain of custody?" Jasmine asked, her legal training focusing on the courtroom implications. "Can we prove these weren't obtained illegally?" "If they were, they might not be admissible as evidence." "That's the interesting part," Rodriguez interjected, pulling up building schematics on his laptop. "Based on the acoustic signatures and background noise analysis, these were recorded in specific areas of Mar-a-Lago that aren't considered private residence under federal law. They're classified as commercial and semi-public space because of how Trump uses them for business meetings and events. That means recording conversations there might not violate Florida's two-party consent wiretapping laws, especially if one party to the conversation consented to the recording." One party? Someone in those rooms was wearing a wire, Congresswoman. Someone close enough to Trump to be in his most sensitive conversations, someone he trusted completely. The implications hit Jasmine like a freight train. This wasn't just an anonymous whistleblower dropping off stolen files. This was someone in Trump's inner circle, someone who'd been documenting his crimes for months, maybe years, waiting for the right moment and the right person to bring them to light. That realization led to another disturbing thought. If someone had been recording Trump for this long, how much more evidence was out there? And why had they chosen her specifically? The answer came in a second envelope, delivered Thursday night to her apartment building. Same block letter handwriting, but this time the message was more personal. Representative Crockett. You were chosen because you're the only member of Congress who's shown the courage to stand up to powerful people regardless of consequences. The infrastructure hearing where you confronted the oil executives, the banking committee where you exposed the money laundering. You don't back down. America needs that now. There's more evidence where this came from, but this should be enough to start. Do the right thing. Your friend. Friday morning, Jasmine made the call that would change American politics forever. "I'm calling a press conference for this afternoon," she told Marcus, who was reviewing the final forensic reports. "Full release of the recordings with complete verification documentation. The party leadership will go insane. Pelosi, Jeffries, they'll want advance notice. They'll want to coordinate messaging. The party leadership has been trying to move past Trump for 3 years without success. This gives them the evidence they need to do it permanently." Marcus nodded, understanding the political calculus. "What about security? If Trump was really planning something against your grandmother, I called her this morning. She's staying with my cousin in Houston until this is over, and I've contacted the Capitol Police about additional security." At 2 p.m., the Rayburn House Office building's largest press conference room was packed beyond capacity. Every major news outlet had sent their top political correspondents. Cable news networks had gone to breaking news coverage. International media filled the back rows. The energy was electric, anticipatory, the kind of atmosphere that only occurred when everyone sensed they were about to witness history. Jasmine walked to the podium carrying a simple manila folder, her expression grave but determined. She changed into her most serious navy blue suit, the one she wore for the most important committee hearings. Behind her, a large screen displayed the seal of the House of Representatives. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming. What I'm about to share with you represents one of the gravest threats to American democracy in our nation's history." The room fell silent. The only sound the clicking of camera shutters and the soft whir of video equipment. She opened the folder and pulled out a typed transcript, her hands steady despite the magnitude of what she was about to reveal. 3 days ago, I received evidence that Donald J. Trump, while serving as the 45th President of the United States and continuing after leaving office, engaged in conversations that constitute clear evidence of multiple federal crimes. The first murmur of shock rippled through the crowd. Reporters leaned forward, phones already recording. These conversations were recorded at Mar-a-Lago between November 2023 and January 2025. They have been verified by independent forensic experts as authentic and unaltered. 3 separate firms, including Dr. Amanda Chen of Georgetown University's Audio Forensics Laboratory, have certified these recordings as genuine. She looked directly into the cameras, knowing that millions of Americans were watching live. In these recordings, you will hear the former president discussing specific plans to intimidate and potentially harm elected officials, including myself and members of my family. You will hear him admit to hiding classified documents from federal investigators in violation of the Espionage Act. You will hear him discuss selling national security secrets to foreign powers. You will hear him plan to use violence and intimidation to overturn election results. The murmur grew louder, reporters frantically typing and texting. These are not allegations. These are not interpretations based on secondhand sources. These are Donald Trump's own words, recorded without his knowledge, planning crimes against the United States and its citizens. She nodded to her staff, who began distributing flash drives to every reporter in the room. You now have copies of these recordings, along with complete forensic analysis proving their authenticity. I encourage you to listen to them in their entirety and draw your own conclusions about what you hear. The explosion was immediate and overwhelming. Reporters were on their phones before she finished speaking, calling editors and producers. Camera crews were already broadcasting live updates. The first audio clips hit social media within minutes, shared and reshared thousands of times before Trump's team even knew what was happening. Trump's response was swift and predictable, but also desperate in a way his previous denials had never been. Within an hour, he was on Truth Social. Fake news, deepfake recordings made by crooked Jasmine Crockett and the radical left Democrats. I never said any of those things. This is election interference and probably illegal. My lawyers are looking into this. But the denials rang hollow against the forensic evidence. By evening, 3 independent news organizations, CNN, the New York Times, and even Fox News, had confirmed the recording's authenticity using their own audio experts. The political earthquake that followed reshaped American politics overnight in ways no one had anticipated. Within 24 hours, 12 Republican senators called for appointment of a special prosecutor. The FBI announced they were opening multiple criminal investigations into the allegations. The Secret Service began investigating the threats against Jasmine and other officials. Trump's remaining allies in Congress found themselves isolated, unable to defend the indefensible evidence of his own voice-planning federal crimes. Senator Mitch McConnell, who had remained largely silent about Trump since January 6th, issued a statement that surprised everyone. If these recordings are authentic, and the evidence suggests they are, then we are dealing with criminal behavior that has no place in American politics. The Republican Party must make clear that we stand for the rule of law, regardless of who breaks it. Even Trump's most loyal defenders struggled to respond. Marjorie Taylor Greene initially claimed the recordings were AI-generated fakes, but was forced to retract when technical experts demonstrated that current AI technology couldn't replicate the specific acoustic signatures found in the recordings. But the real reckoning came 3 days later when the anonymous source decided to reveal themselves. Mike Hensley, Trump's longtime head of security and confidant, walked into FBI headquarters in Miami with a team of lawyers and a story that stunned even seasoned federal investigators who thought they'd seen everything. "I've been recording him for 2 years," Hensley told a packed FBI conference room, his voice steady despite the magnitude of his confession. "Ever since January 6th, when I realized he was never going to stop. Someone had to document what he was really saying, what he was really planning, because I knew someday the country would need proof." Hensley had been more than just a security chief. He'd been Trump's most trusted advisor on sensitive matters, present for conversations that even family members weren't allowed to hear. And he'd been horrified by what he'd witnessed in those private moments. The threats against Representative Crockett were the last straw, he explained to the agents and prosecutors assembled around the conference table. When he started talking about harming her family, about targeting an 89-year-old woman who never hurt anyone, I knew I had to act. And I knew she was the only member of Congress with the courage to actually use the evidence effectively. The recordings Hensley provided to federal investigators filled in the complete picture of Trump's activities since leaving office. Hours of conversations revealing a systematic plan to undermine American democracy, intimidate officials, and retain power through any means necessary. Plans to coordinate with foreign adversaries, to sell classified information, to use violence against political opponents. He kept talking about Putin like they were business partners, Hensley told investigators. He'd say things like, "Vlad's going to love this submarine data," or "This will be worth millions to the Chinese." It wasn't hypothetical. He was actively planning to sell out the country. Trump's legal challenges collapsed within weeks. Faced with hours of his own voice-planning federal crimes, his legal team advised him to negotiate a plea deal. The alternative was a trial where the primary evidence against him would be literally his own words, authenticated by the most sophisticated forensic analysis available. The political impact was even more profound and lasting. The Republican Party, finally freed from Trump's grip by undeniable evidence of his criminality, began the painful but necessary process of rebuilding its reputation and credibility. Primary candidates across the country distanced themselves from Trump's endorsements. Major donors who had continued supporting Trump-aligned candidates suddenly found other priorities. Democrats found themselves in the unusual position of not having to argue against Trump anymore. The recordings did that work for them. Instead, they could focus on governing and policy, presenting a stark contrast to the chaos and criminality that had defined the Trump era. For Jasmine, the experience was transformative in ways she hadn't expected. She had entered Congress 3 years earlier as a voice for her Texas district, focused on housing policy and economic inequality. She emerged from the whistleblower crisis as a national symbol of accountability and courage, proof that democracy's defenders could still triumph over its enemies. 6 months after the press conference, she stood before a joint session of Congress to address the nation about democracy, accountability, and the rule of law. The speech was carried live by every major network, translated into dozens of languages for international audiences. The recordings you heard weren't just evidence of one man's crimes, she told the assembled lawmakers and the millions watching at home. They were evidence of what happens when we stop holding power accountable, when we decide that some people are above the law, when we allow fear to overcome our commitment to justice. She paused, looking out at the packed chamber, seeing faces from both parties listening intently. Mike Hensley risked everything to bring us the truth, not because he was political. He'd worked for Republican administrations for 20 years, not because he was seeking fame or fortune. He's received death threats and had to relocate his family. He did it because he was patriotic. He understood that democracy only survives when brave people are willing to speak up, even when it's dangerous, even when it's costly. The standing ovation lasted 5 full minutes, with lawmakers from both parties rising to their feet. But Mr. Hensley couldn't have made a difference alone. It took institutions willing to verify evidence rather than dismiss it. It took media outlets committed to truth rather than ratings. It took citizens willing to demand accountability rather than accept excuses. That's how democracy works, not through any one person, but through all of us working together. As she spoke, Jasmine thought about the anonymous envelope that had started it all, about the courage of one man to document the truth at great personal risk, and about the moment she'd decided to risk her own career and safety to share it with the world. The lesson of these past months isn't that bad people sometimes get caught, she concluded, her voice growing stronger with each word. The lesson is that good people have the power to catch them if we're brave enough to use it, if we're willing to put country before party, truth before comfort, and justice before convenience. The aftermath continued to ripple through American politics for years to come. The recordings became required study in civics and government classes across the country, cited as examples of both how democracy can be threatened and how it can defend itself when citizens demand accountability. Mike Hensley largely stayed out of the public eye, protected by federal witness security programs, but occasionally emerging to speak at universities and civic organizations about the importance of individual courage in defending democratic institutions. Trump himself faded from public life more completely than anyone had expected. The recordings had done what years of investigations, impeachments, and political attacks couldn't accomplish. They had let Americans hear the real Donald Trump, unfiltered and unspun, planning crimes against the very democracy he'd sworn to defend. For Jasmine Crockett, the experience reinforced everything she'd learned about power and accountability during her years as a public defender, and now as a member of Congress. Sometimes the most powerful weapon against corruption isn't a sword, it's a microphone. Sometimes the most dangerous thing for a criminal isn't a prosecutor. It's the truth, spoken in their own voice for everyone to hear. As she often said in speeches at universities and civic organizations in the months and years that followed, democracy's greatest strength isn't that it prevents bad people from seeking power. It's that it gives good people the tools to stop them when they do. But those tools only work if we're brave enough to use them. The recordings had proven that even in an age of alternative facts and partisan division, truth still had the power to triumph over lies. Accountability could still triumph over corruption, and ordinary people with extraordinary courage could still change the course of history. But the story was far from over. 3 months after Trump's guilty plea on federal conspiracy charges, Jasmine received another envelope. This time, it wasn't anonymous. The return address read, M. Hensley, Federal Witness Protection Program. Inside was a handwritten letter and another USB drive. Representative Crockett, the letter began. What you released was only the beginning. There are recordings from 12 other locations involving dozens of other conspirators. The American people deserve to know the full scope of what was planned. This drive contains everything. Use it wisely. Mike. Jasmine stared at the new drive, her hands trembling slightly. The first revelations had already transformed American politics beyond recognition. What could possibly be left to expose? The answer, when she plugged in the drive, was staggering in its scope and chilling in its implications. The files were organized by location and date, spanning 3 full years. Mar-a-Lago was just one of many sites where Hensley had been recording. There were conversations from Trump Tower, from private jets, from secret meetings in hotel suites across the country. But it was the file labeled International Coordination that made Jasmine's blood run cold. She found herself listening to a conversation dated August 2024 between Trump and a man with a thick Russian accent who was identified in Hensley's notes as Viktor Kozlov, GRU operative. The submarine schedules you provided were very helpful, the Russian voice said. Moscow is pleased with the intelligence value. The next payment will be deposited in the usual account. Trump's voice, pleased and casual. Victor, you haven't seen anything yet. Wait until you see the nuclear launch protocols. That information alone should be worth $50 million. Mr. President, these protocols, they are current? Current as of last week. I still have friends in the Pentagon, people who understand that America's been weak for too long. Sometimes you have to work with strong leaders, even if they're from other countries. Jasmine had to stop the recording. The implications were beyond anything she'd imagined. This wasn't just corruption or abuse of power. This was treason at the highest level, ongoing collaboration with foreign intelligence services, the active sale of America's most sensitive military secrets. She called Marcus immediately. We need an emergency meeting with the FBI tonight. What's wrong? You sound terrified. Because I am. What we released before was just the tip of the iceberg. This goes so much deeper than we thought. That evening, in a secure conference room at FBI headquarters in Washington, Jasmine sat across from Director Christopher Wray and a team of counterintelligence specialists. The expressions on their faces as they listened to the recordings ranged from shock to fury to something approaching despair. How long has this been going on? Director Wray asked after hearing the Russian conversation. According to Hensley's timeline, Jasmine replied, consulting the detailed notes that had accompanied the drive. At least since 2022. But there are references to earlier arrangements that suggest it might go back to his presidency. Special Agent Patricia Valdez, the Bureau's top counterintelligence expert, leaned forward. Representative Crockett, what you've brought us represents the largest intelligence breach in American history. If these recordings are authentic, and our preliminary analysis suggests they are, we are talking about a conspiracy that could have compromised every aspect of our national security. The investigation that followed made the original Trump prosecutions look simple by comparison. The new recordings implicated dozens of individuals across multiple agencies and institutions. Pentagon officials who had provided classified information, Justice Department lawyers who had interfered with investigations, intelligence operatives who had fed information to foreign powers. But perhaps the most shocking revelation came from a recording made just 2 months before the 2024 election. Trump's voice, speaking to a group of military contractors and former intelligence officials, "Look, we all know Biden stole 2020. But 2024? We're not going to let them steal this one. I've got friends in the military, good people who understand what's at stake. If they try to certify another fake election, we'll have no choice but to take direct action." An unfamiliar voice responded, "Sir, when you say direct action, I mean we activate the contingency plans, martial law, suspension of the Constitution, whatever it takes to save the country. The founders never intended for America to be destroyed by a bunch of communists in their fake elections." Another voice, this one belonging to a retired general whose name made Jasmine's stomach turn. "The 82nd Airborne is ready, sir. We have loyalists in key positions. When you give the word, we can secure the capital within hours." The recording revealed a conspiracy that went far beyond election interference or document theft. This was a planned military coup involving active-duty personnel and retired officers, designed to keep Trump in power regardless of election results. Agent Valdez called it the closest America has come to a successful overthrow of the government since the Civil War. The military investigation that followed was swift and thorough. Within weeks, 17 active-duty officers and dozens of retired personnel were arrested. The plot had been more advanced than anyone realized, with weapons caches hidden near Washington, communication networks established outside normal channels, and detailed plans for seizing key government buildings. But the international implications were even more disturbing. The recordings revealed that foreign governments had been aware of the coup planning and had provided both financial and logistical support. A conversation between Trump and Chinese intelligence operatives, recorded in September 2024, showed the extent of foreign involvement. "Beijing is very interested in American military weakness," the Chinese operative said through a translator. "Internal conflict would serve our purposes well. We are prepared to provide additional funding for your activities." Trump's response was chilling in its casual acceptance of foreign manipulation. China's been smart about this from the beginning. They understand that sometimes you have to break things before you can fix them. America needs to be broken down before it can be rebuilt the right way. The revelations continued for months, each new recording adding another layer to a conspiracy that seemed to have no bottom. Foreign bank accounts, secret meetings with adversarial intelligence services, plans to assassinate political opponents, schemes to manipulate financial markets. The scope of criminal activity was unprecedented in American history. For Jasmine, the weight of being the conduit for these revelations was enormous. She found herself at the center of the biggest political scandal in American history, responsible for information that was reshaping not just American politics, but global geopolitical relationships. The personal cost was significant. Death threats arrived daily, requiring round-the-clock security protection. Her family had to be relocated multiple times. Her congressional work was constantly interrupted by briefings with intelligence agencies and testimony before grand juries. But the impact on American democracy was profound and lasting. The recordings had exposed a level of corruption and foreign infiltration that shocked even the most cynical political observers. More importantly, they had provided the evidence needed to root out the conspiracy and hold the perpetrators accountable. The trials that followed were historic in their scope. Trump himself faced charges under the Espionage Act, the Sedition Act, and multiple RICO statutes. The evidence against him was overwhelming. His own voice, recorded over years, planning crimes against the United States. The sentences, when they came, reflected the magnitude of the crimes. Trump received life in prison without the possibility of parole. Dozens of co-conspirators received sentences ranging from 20 years to life. The military officers involved were court-martialed and received lengthy prison terms. But perhaps the most significant outcome was the institutional reform that followed. Congress passed the most comprehensive intelligence oversight legislation in decades. The military implemented new procedures for vetting personnel and monitoring communications. Intelligence agencies developed better systems for detecting and preventing foreign infiltration. The recordings had done more than expose a conspiracy. They had forced America to confront the vulnerabilities in its democratic institutions and take concrete steps to address them. A year after the final revelations, Jasmine stood before the United Nations General Assembly to address the global implications of what had been uncovered. What the recordings revealed wasn't just an American problem, she told the assembled delegates. It was a warning about how democratic institutions everywhere can be infiltrated and undermined by those who seek power at any cost. She paused, looking out at representatives from nearly every nation on Earth. But they also showed something else. That democracy has the tools to defend itself if we're brave enough to use them. Mike Hensley's courage in documenting these crimes, the forensic experts who verified the evidence, the investigators who followed the leads wherever they went, they all proved that truth is still more powerful than lies, that accountability is still possible even at the highest levels of government. The speech was viewed by over 1 billion people worldwide and became a defining moment in discussions about democratic resilience and the rule of law. For Hensley himself, the aftermath was bittersweet. He remained in witness protection, his identity carefully guarded,